Welcome to the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast by Venus O'Hara. I'm here to welcome you into the world of orgasmic living by hosting experts to discuss orgasmic topics such as nutrition, spirituality, personal development, sexuality, and much more. Here, we will offer lifestyle lessons that can help you lead a fulfilling, joyous, and orgasmic lifestyle. I'm your guide, Venus O'Hara. Welcome to episode 106 of the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast with Venus O'Hara. In this first quarter moon episode, we discuss attachment styles, relationship dynamics, and masculinity. We speak with Salinas, a relationship coach for men. I also review the mockumentary Kunk on Life, available on Netflix. And the episode ends with a guided meditation with affirmations for healthy attachment styles. But first, let me share with you my own perspectives and experience with attachment styles. When I first heard from Salinas, my instinct said, no, you've already interviewed so many men's coaches or relationship coaches for men, and I thought it would be more of the same kind of message. However, it was very different. Our conversation unfolded in ways that were quite distinct from previous conversations with masculinity coaches. We spoke about attachment theory quite a lot, and that's something that I've been quite interested in my personal life at the moment due to certain circumstances that I am currently navigating. And attachment theory is something that had a profound effect on me when I first discovered it. If you've been an avid listener of this podcast, you might already know this story, but I was reading a book several years ago called Living an Orgasmic Life. As you can imagine, the title really appealed to me, and I was expecting an orgasmic read. However, the book is more, how would I say, heavier or kind of more it's deeper than what I was expecting. It's a really great book, by the way. I think it's a really good book. And anyway, she talks about in chapter 7, blocks to intimacy. And here is where I discovered attachment theory. So there are, according to this framework, 4 types of attachments. There are secure attachment, avoidant attachment, ambivalent attachment, and anxious avoidant attachment. And as soon as I read this, I immediately identified with the avoidant attachment. And attachment styles are how we form our relationships, and they can really be based on how our primary caregiver interacted with us when we were children. So when I saw this, it made me feel that as a child-free single woman, perhaps my life choices were not choices after all, but they were consequences. It was kind of written in stone, and that had a really weird feeling. It kind of provoked a very weird feeling within me, and it wasn't a good one. It was almost like this very depressing wake-up call. And the time, this was in June 2020, and I'm not usually someone who gets down about things, but I was just doing all I could to try and make myself feel better. And at that time, it was the midst of the pandemic, but things were slowly opening up. And I went to a yoga class. I remember my neck was so sore. I felt so down. And I did things that had been on my to-do list for a long time and I hadn't gotten around to do. And I just went doing all of these things. I was, frantically trying to make myself feel better. And then a couple of days after this, I woke up with Bell's palsy. And that was just like, wow, Bell's palsy, if you're unfamiliar with it, is facial paralysis. So I looked in the mirror, couldn't recognize myself. And all of a sudden, the most important thing for me at that time was being able to smile. I didn't really care anymore about attachment theory. I just, it was like a reprioritization of my needs. And yes, so I put that on the back burner for a while. However, I have recently kind of gone through an experience where my avoidant tendencies were really challenged. And I got to a point where I was feeling that all of these things that I was avoiding for such a long time, intimacy, just sharing, just emotional intimacy, that I actually realized that I really craved those things. And that was also it made me kind of mourn my past decisions, because now I do believe, everyone has, traumas that are based on childhood, but I do think we also add to those traumas in our adult life. We don't have anyone else to blame but ourselves, which sounds a bit bleak. Anyway, I wanted to talk to Danny Salinas after our conversation, after our official interview. I wanted to, ask him a few things that had been a bit more personal to me. And I was expecting just to do, a 10-minute chit chat after the call, but it ended up being a lot longer. And then he offered me a session of one of his coaching sessions, and it was so moving, this session, and it really made me think a lot. It triggered a lot of things that had been laying under the surface for me, things that I've known in my bones but I've not given a voice to, and that was kind of unsettling but confronting at the same time. It was very necessary. And it was about, it was interesting. What I wanted to say about that, because it's super, super personal what I was sharing with him. But what I will share is that, it's very different speaking to a professional compared to, just chatting to your friends. Because obviously I do have people in my life, fortunately, that I can share my issues with, my challenges with. But I speak to someone when it's all about you and it's not a conversation, but it's someone who's trying to, guide you, heal you. That's a very, very different dynamic than someone who you hope is going to be impartial and really ask you these questions that are going to make you question yourself, I guess, and come to new conclusions and answers. So that was a really eye-opening experience for me. But in parallel, I've met this guy who is, I would say, he's a spiritual guru, and he has a very different approach of healing. He doesn't see it so much as facing core wounds, but almost more about meditation and expansion of consciousness so that these problems are dissolved. And I think I'm actually kind of working with two modalities at the moment. And I do feel, even though they might seem contradictory, they are actually complementary. So it's really interesting that these conclusions that I am coming to in my mind. And also I'm combining that with a lot of reading. I'm currently reading Psycho-Cybernetics, which I've spoken about on here as well. And I'm also doing some subconscious reprogramming, as well as some other just self-care things like massages and lots of meditation. So it's really interesting, this whole journey. So I do think on the other side of pain, there is, liberation, expansion. And I'm really interested in that journey. And I'm on that journey right now. It's super cool. I'm very, very, very happy with where it's taking me. And I'm just uncovering new things that I didn't know about myself, or I knew about myself, but I wasn't really giving a voice to. And that's super exciting. So I think sometimes it's good to, question yourself, sometimes your choices, and make sure you're doing the best for yourself, I guess. And that's what I really believe is super empowering, to actually, speak up for yourself. So many people do not speak up for themselves. At the weekend, I actually gave a coaching session to a woman with my self-love modality. And it was so interesting to see, how this person was, giving so much to other people and missing out on giving to herself. And I think this is quite common among women, especially mothers. It's always very outward, all this energy, and there's no kind of replenishing happening. But I think it's so important to, fill your own cup first in life, and transcend the difficulty so that you can make better choices in the future, because we are responsible for our life choices. Anyway, let's get into the interview. Are you looking to strengthen your pelvic floor in a fun and engaging way? Introducing PeriFit, the pelvic floor trainer that combines biofeedback with interactive video games. With PeriFit, you can track your progress and improve your pelvic health while playing games with your vagina on your smartphone. It's easy, effective, and more importantly, it's fun. For a limited time, you can get 25% off with the code Venus15 at checkout. Visit perifit.co today and take control of your pelvic health with PeriFit. That's perifit.co and use the code Venus15 for 25% off. The link is also in the show notes below. Strengthen, play, and thrive with Perifit. Disclaimer: consult your healthcare provider before starting any new fitness program. Now it's time for this episode's interview. We'll be speaking with Dani Salinas, a relationship coach for men. Dani Salinas, welcome to the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you here. For those who are unfamiliar with your work, could you tell us what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a men's and dating and relationship coach, also for women, but specifically focus on men. I think that's an area. Sorry, I just heard somebody start to do a drill outside, so I'll close the window. And yeah, what I do essentially is help men and women be able to heal their attachment styles, heal their attachment wounds, to be able to find, build, and sustain a meaningful, fulfilling relationship in a nutshell.
Amazing. Well, I've had a few people in the masculinity relationship space on this podcast. And when I received your message, I was thinking, oh no, not another masculinity coach. But what really sold it was the amazing rap that you attached to the message. And I hear you have a special rap for us today.
I do, yes, and I appreciate you appreciating the originality and yeah, just the creative way that I reached out to you. So I did prepare a rap just for you guys and for everyone, for you in the audience. So I'll just go ahead into it.
Amazing.
All right, so yo, check it. It's the orgasmic lifestyle where every day's a climax, like the anticipated peak of a movie, IMAX. You better not be sleeping on this pod like IMAX. Queen Venus hosting us, let's honor your highness. I know that you're a goddess of holistic self-love, so teach us how to leave all that trauma behind us. From health to sexuality and everything in between, we'll show you how to turn your life into an incredible dream. So sit back, relax, breathe in the wisdom. We address the root. We don't just treat the symptoms. So come and get your ear candy. It's gluten free, zero sugar, vegan friendly, natural treat. Like Pop Rocks, it'll blow your noggin wide open. A cosmic, orgasmic, auditory explosion. So make sure to tune in and even tell a friend. Venus and Danny, we teaming up for the win. Hey.
Oh my God, I love it. That is so cool. I love it.
I
So what was
appreciate
your
it. I wrote in like two
so tell us
seconds.
about
So
this the rap. How is that one of your passions?
it is, well, music in general is my passion. And rapping is something kind of a fun little nifty, hobby, I guess I kind of picked up along the way. It's definitely not my strong suit, that's for sure. I'm more of a guitarist and singer. That's kind of like my main thing, and even play for like plant medicine ceremonies and things of that nature. So that's definitely my area of expertise, but or another area, I guess I would say. But the rapping is just something fun and quirky. So.
Mhm. So how did you get into this path of relationships and especially focusing on men? How did your journey? What was your journey?
Yeah, well, I'll try to keep it, short, sweet, and concise. But essentially, I was obsessed with women since as long as I can remember, just being a little kid and like just being fascinated with women. I think a lot of us are. And, I became sort of a love addict and also eventually a sex addict, and was just sort of, jumping from relationship to relationship, trying to figure things out, trying to make things work, but it never really did. And it wasn't until about maybe 5 years ago that I really like had a kind of a turning point where, I actually cheated on one of my girlfriends. And I made a promise to myself that I would never cheat on a girlfriend, because actually my dad cheated on my mom, and it was something that like I felt very passionately about. And I was like, I never want to follow in those footsteps. But there I was. And then that was kind of like a wake up call to me. It was just like, wow, I just broke such massive integrity with myself, and why did that happen? Like, and that kind of led me down the path of realizing like what was going on within myself, what led to the cheating. Why didn't I feel comfortable in that relationship speaking up? And so that kind of just started my whole journey of that deeper inner healing, that self growth, learning about attachment styles, and applying it to myself, really, because I was just fed up. I was, I guess, like a decade and a half of just frustrating relationships, after frustrating relationships. And eventually, I guess the sort of climax of all that, no pun intended, actually, was simply that I was dating this like ideal fantasy woman in my mind. She was this really gorgeous stripper that I was dating, and she was actually a really kind person as well. but there was just this incompatibility, and we were both still struggling with insecure attachment styles. And it ultimately ended up kind of in a big blowout where we had this huge argument. I was being verbally abusive, and it was just another one of those moments of just kind of looking at myself and being like, why can't I get this? And that was, even though I had the theory and the awareness by that point, it still hadn't become embodied. And I think that was even more frustrating, was like knowing my attachment style, knowing this stuff, but not being able to really do anything about it. And that was like a turning point for me. And that's when I really started to like embody and put into practice a lot of the stuff that I had learned about in theory, and actually attract much healthier, more fulfilling relationships. And since then, there was a definitive shift in the quality of relationships that I attracted. And now I'm in a relationship with a partner for over a year now, which for me, that's actually kind of a long time. I would get stuck in that 3 to 6 month period, and it would be really challenging for me to commit because I also had like this fearful avoidant attachment style. And what's beautiful about my relationship now is just it's filled with so much ease, so much communication, right? We talk about everything, and I've learned how to be able to hold space for the feminine, and we both have learned how to resolve conflict and come together and ultimately become stronger and more intimate. So that's it in a nutshell. Happy to, elaborate anything.
Wow, it's so amazing. There's so much to talk about there. So about the cheating, I mean, it does, it's really interesting because when someone cheats or like in a part of a family dynamic, the repercussions can go on for generations. It's such a profound wound, like when a parent cheats and, the children feel it and that can affect their relationships as well. Did it make you feel maybe more forgiving or understanding the human side of it when you have being in a situation yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Specifically towards my dad, I think like
Mm,
I had held a lot of, like a lot of men, I think in our modern days, especially spiritual men, I think oftentimes we can judge our fathers, whether we like to admit it or not. Sometimes it can happen on a very subtle, sort of subconscious level. But I was definitely judging my dad for a lot of things, not just the cheating, his sort of emotional distance and coldness, as well. But yeah, I guess being in that, like literally being in the situation and doing it myself, it was just like, wow, like that was a big wake up call for me, because I think up until that moment, I sort of saw myself as like separate from men, or even
mm.
above men, right? Like I kind of almost didn't, I was like judging myself for even being a man in a way. And so I wanted to distance myself from what men were like. And I remember this judgment would follow me in a lot of different places in my life. Like even when I would hit the gym, and I would hear like guys talking in the locker room, like I'd always be like rolling my eyes because they'd be like talking about all this stuff, and I'd be like, ugh, these are what guys are like. And when I cheated on my partner, that was a big wake up call, because it was like, man, I am no different. And actually, the fact that I'm thinking that I'm different is like, it's actually a self judgment. Like I'm judging the masculine energy, not even men. It's just like the masculine energy that's within myself. So it was a subtle way of like self judgment. And once I started to see myself as no different than other men, well, different in, different qualities, but really no better than other men, recognizing that we're all just trying to do the best that we can, it allowed me to start connecting with the masculine energy within myself and integrating it more into my being, which actually helped me stop being a people pleaser, which helped me heal my insecure attachment style, which helped me show up for the feminine and provide masculine containment, which allowed me to connect more with other men in my life. And now I run a men's circle and I facilitate men's work, and it's such a beautiful thing to be able to connect with men in that way, where for a long time it was like I didn't really have a lot of male friends that I trusted, or even just trusted the masculine energy in general.
Wow. So what was your learning like? So what did you turn to after this realization that you wanted to, turn something negative into something, transformational? What was your process?
Yeah. Well, I think the process essentially was kind of just throwing a bunch of stuff on the wall and seeing what sticks, because I didn't really know that much about this stuff. That's when I sort of also started becoming a coach. Like I started with health coaching, so I started learning more about like the mind and the subconscious and where our beliefs are coming from, and eventually, this path led me to becoming certified in integrated attachment theory, which is a very powerful framework to help heal the attachment style. And this is by a woman named Thais Gibson. She's
Oh,
incredible, just so
love
much
her.
deep, deep wisdom. Yeah, she's
Mm,
she's amazing. And learning her modality was just very powerful. And she's kind of combined a few different modalities as well. And of course, I put my own spin on it. We all put our own spin on things. Like I personally like to incorporate more parts work, which is like kind of like IFS inspired internal family systems for anybody who knows that. But more generally speaking, parts work and seeing ourselves that we have different parts within ourselves, right? Within our subconscious mind, there's many different parts. So when I started to kind of relate to myself in this way and really start to see that like, oh, I have this part that desires certain things, and I have this other part that actually judges myself for desiring those things, right? And being able to sort of integrate these parts together. So that parts work was a huge part of my journey, my growth, especially when it came to like actually the dating process, right? I see this a lot with my clients where they want to approach a woman, they want to go talk, to strike up a conversation, but then they're afraid. There's all these fears and these limiting beliefs and these core wounds that come up, right? And so I help them be able to relate to themselves, to their emotions better through the parts, right? As well as identifying and reprogramming those core wounds that I was talking about as far as like some of those, for example, just to make it practical, is like I will be rejected, right? That's one of the biggest ones when it comes to specifically men approaching, but really anybody who's approaching who wants to actually connect with another person, right? I will be rejected. That's a core wound. There's another one's I am bad is another one, right? This is in particular for men, I think, when they think about approaching a woman, the most common complaint that I hear is like, I don't want to creep her out, right? Like I don't want to creep her out because then, but really what they're saying is I don't want to experience myself as being bad, right? And
Mm.
this being bad follows them into their relationships too. And it's oftentimes when it comes, so I'm a little jumping all over the place, but I think when I cheated on my girlfriend, after reflecting on why I did that, the biggest reason was that I wasn't speaking up and actually expressing my truth because I was afraid of hurting her, right? And that's actually coming from an I am bad core wound because I was afraid of actually experiencing myself as a bad person. So I would keep my mouth shut and thinking that I was doing the right thing for her sake, but really it was just creating resentment inside of myself, which eventually created this isolation and distance and emotional disconnection from her, which eventually led me to actually cheat and feel justified in doing so because I was like, oh, well, I wasn't getting my needs met anyways. But that was my responsibility to advocate for those needs, and I wasn't doing that, right? So
Mm. I
let
think
me
in
pause
situations
there
like
because
that, I think often, whether it's in a relationship or even dating, we tend to, blame the other person. So you actually took responsibility of your situation. Was that easy for you to do and think, oh, I have to change? And what was that process like when, seeing how when you changed, what you were attracting started to change? That's really interesting, this reprogramming of your beliefs.
yeah. So I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly. So you're saying what was the moment that? Sorry, can you just
So,
repeat
so,
it?
you- so you
Mhm.
so you changed yourself, rather than blaming the other person. 'Cause that's what happens a lot when even if it's a dating process or relationships. When we're not happy about something, we tend to blame the situation or the person and not take responsibility. So that was that natural for you, just to kind of take responsibility and say, well, how can I learn from this? How can I transform? And
No,
what
not at
was
all.
yeah.
Like it wasn't natural at all. Like I literally, I mean, this whole thing about me cheating on my partner happened when I was like 26. I'm 31 now, so this is like 5 years ago, roughly. Um, and it's essentially like up until that point, I actually had been just blaming women, right? Blaming my partners for why the relationship wasn't working or why I wasn't fulfilled. Like maybe there was certain aspects of responsibility that I was taking, but it wasn't like 100% radical responsibility where it's just like I am manifesting this, I am creating this, like I'm attracting these people, like I am the common denominator in all my relationships. Like that didn't really hit me until after I actually cheated. And then the moment it actually hit me, to get into the gritty details here, is that like I felt so guilty after cheating on my partner that I was like, I have to tell her. Like I cannot continue. Like I can't just not tell her. Like I couldn't live with that guilt. So like the very next day, I just we you know she came over to my house. I sat us down. We were sitting on the edge of my bed, and I just remember telling her, I was like, hey, like I cheated on you, and like this is what happened, right? And I remember she was like, the thing that hurt the most was like, I was fully expecting and almost subconsciously wanting her to like start to just judge me and shame me and like, and just curse at me and like punish me. That's sort of what I was expecting and what I wanted almost. And she didn't do that. Instead, she was like, she just took like this deep breath, like kind of like caught herself. And she was just like, Danny, like, I love you, but I can't be with you. And she just like left. And that was it. Like she didn't even argue. She didn't even do anything. She didn't call me an asshole or whatever like I was expecting. And it was like at that moment, it was like this story that I had formulated in my mind that she didn't really love me, that she, it was like this whole story that made me cheat. It just got dismantled in a second. And I saw that I was like, she actually does care about me. She loves me. Like she could have worked through this. I wasn't the one talking. So I just got hit with this huge like train of shame. And I just remember crying for an hour just on my bed, like just wallowing in my own sorrow and shame. And from that moment, like that, in that moment, I remember that I just heard this sort of like inner voice. And I don't really get this. I would say I'm a spiritual person, but like I don't really get like voices. I know some people can be
Mm.
connected to that stuff. This doesn't really happen to me, but in that moment, like I heard this clear and powerful voice just coming up that was just like, you couldn't accept her love because you don't love yourself. And it just
Wow.
kept like punching me in the face. It was just like, you can't accept her love because you don't love yourself. You don't love yourself. And that was the first moment that I really, really started realizing I was like, I remember that thought of not loving myself. I was like, I love myself. Like I was dismissing that thought. But then it was like when I really let it sit because it just wouldn't go away, I was like, holy shit, I don't love myself. It was just like, I was like, wow. And I was like, why don't I love myself? And that's what kind of unraveled that whole thing and allowed me to take full responsibility. But it was a very visceral experience for me.
Wow. So then you started to make this transformation, and then did you start to see that you were attracting different relationships? You were able to go deeper.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, the funny thing is, I guess for a while before then, I was sort of like, my old attachment style is a fearful avoidant, also known as an anxious avoidant, which for anybody who doesn't know what that is, essentially like I have both the anxious and
Mm,
the avoidant tendencies, right?
mm,
Depending on the relationship. And up until that point, I had primarily been more on the avoidance side. So I was attracting women who were more anxious, and I was the one who was a little bit more closed off and emotionally distant. But after that moment, like it was such a radical, powerful change of just realizing I didn't love myself. Like, and I wanted to open my heart so bad. Like, I was like, I'm tired of being this like emotionally distant, kind of cold person, just like my dad was, just like I was judging him. And I was really, that's why it's like the things that we judge, oftentimes there's an aspect of that in ourselves. Like, this is the shadow work
mm,
stuff, right? Like, the things we demonize in another are really aspects of ourselves that we can't quite accept. And we might actually be surprised to realize how much we actually do those things and don't even realize, don't even see them. It's in our blind spots. So, anyways, I was actually emotionally distant. But after that relationship, after the cheating and that whole time, I actually like remember attracting a partner and I was enacting the anxious tendencies because I had opened my heart up and I was like, I'm ready to love, I'm
mm,
ready to be healed. And then I didn't realize there was this whole other end of the spectrum that I hadn't experienced as much, you know? And actually, I had experienced it when my first relationship ever, and it all started making sense to me because it was like I experienced it with my first relationship, and then I closed my heart and because she broke my heart, and I was like, that's it, I'm not gonna be like that again. And I switched over to the avoidance side for like nearly a decade and a half, and then after this cheating thing, swung my pendulum back over to the anxious side, attracted this woman that was a little more emotionally unavailable, and meant it just destroyed me. And had no like bearings of what was going on because I hadn't experienced that anxious side of things for quite some time. And it was really challenging. It helped me to really empathize with like my anxious clients, right? Even though like I've been more so an avoidant, that was like one of those moments where I'm like, damn, like I know how it feels to be that anxious and it sucks, you know? And then so anyways, and that relationship didn't pan out and I had my heart broken. But I remember I was like crying so bad after like we broke up. And but I remember also being pretty happy because I was like I get to feel like I was the first time I actually like that pain was sucked, but it was like I'm feeling something. Like this is different. This is new for me. Like normally I'm not invested that much. I'm in a
mm,
breakup. I'm like, okay, whatever. Like I can find another girl or whatever. But that moment was just like my heart was just like, and I was like, I know I had my heart open. Like otherwise I wouldn't be able to feel this. And that's when I realized, okay, but that was imbalanced as well. So how do I find that medium, right? How do I keep my heart open but also have boundaries? And that's when I started to really integrate that stuff, learning about boundaries, learning about the attachment styles, right? All of these things and recognizing like, oh man, like I need to slow down. Like I need to slow down when my relationships. I
mm,
need to stop trying to have sex on the first date, even the first week. Like I need to really be mindful about like me connecting with this person, gauging for compatibility, making sure we're okay, screening out red flags, right? So that whole process. That's a little bit more of the outer game stuff. Like that stuff is more like practical things that you can do. But then as well as doing the inner work, right? Identifying those core wounds, like for myself. And a big one for me was like I will be trapped, right? I'm trapped in this relationship and having to reprogram that. And I'm happy to talk about how to specifically do that. But let me pause there because I can just
Yeah,
keep
I
going,
think
as you can see.
let's talk about attachment styles for those who are unfamiliar with them. So, what is an attachment style, and how many attachment styles? What are the attachment styles?
Yeah, so I try to simplify this as much as possible because like I've read multiple books on attachment styles. I've done the certification and it can just be a little complex and a little bit just like I try to simplify as much as possible. So this is what I'll say. Attachment style is essentially just your sort of tried and true method of showing up in a relationship, right? Now, I say tried and true, it might actually not be a healthy or functional way of showing up, but it's the way that it's what feels like most safe to you, essentially, and what you're most used to showing up in a relationship, right? So, an attachment style is essentially like an archetype. So, if I know your attachment style, I can more or less predict how you're going to show up in a relationship. To a certain degree. Obviously, everybody's unique and there's little things here and there, but more or less it allows to provide a certain framework. And it can be very powerful for you to learn your attachment style if you don't already know, because it's helpful to actually like be able to see like, oh, so that is the way that I'm showing up. And you can almost anticipate your own behavior, right? Especially like the coping mechanisms. Like how do you actually cope with difficult situations in a relationship? Like how do you cope with your partner not texting you back, right? What are your coping mechanisms there? How do you cope with your partner asking too much from you and you feeling like it's too much, right? So finding healthier coping mechanisms to actually show up in the relationship. So when you show up when you find better coping mechanisms and better communication strategies and all these things to show up in a relationship, you start shifting your attachment style from the insecure type to a more secure type, right? And the more secure type essentially is just going to actually like go into the discomfort, go into the conflict and figure out a way to actually find resolution instead of taking either this approach of like, I'm pushing the partner away because I don't want to deal with this, or the opposite, right? Like trying to really like be like, come here, we need to solve this like right now because I'm uncomfortable and I need resolution in this moment, like right. And so those are kind of the opposite extremes. So to explain the what you're where you're talking about what are the attachment styles, I like to think about a triangle, right? So like, or like a pyramid, if you will. And so on one end of the spectrum, on the bottom of the pyramid, you have the avoidant, right? Which this kind of person essentially had an upbringing where they had emotional, like they had consistent emotional neglect, essentially,
Mm.
right? So what happens to a child when they have a consistent emotional neglect? Well, they learn basically that they can't depend on anybody. They have to depend on themselves, and that their emotions are essentially useless because they're not being acknowledged, and they could be actually being shamed as well. But regardless, it's like my emotions are not going to help me. So they disconnect themselves from their emotions. They really prioritize independence because that's what they had to do to survive, literally. And so later on in life, it doesn't feel safe for them to necessarily depend on other people, which is why it's really tricky for them in relationships, right? So on that end of the spectrum, you have the avoidant. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the anxious, which they basically had like sometimes they would get love, sometimes they wouldn't. So it was this inconsistency, right? And that inconsistency is, oh man, it's really brutal because when you get that inconsistency, when you sometimes get it and sometimes don't, right? It creates this like sort of deep desire and longing to get those emotions, but you're also not getting them occasionally, which creates this anxiety in you, right? And your nervous system is just like kind of going haywire and you fear not getting it. You fear that abandonment, right? Which is what it can feel like to a child in their nervous system when their parents are not actually showing up consistently for them, right? So that on the other end of the spectrum, you have that anxious, right? And they prioritize more dependency, right? Like they want somebody there, they want that support, and they really struggle with being independent, right? So this is where you get this like this huge spectrum and the contrast in the attachment styles. In the middle, you have what's called the fearful avoidant or the anxious avoidant, sometimes called a disorganized attachment style, depending on the modality that you're using or looking through. And you can just think of that just to make it really simple. They can have both, right? So sometimes they will be more avoidant, sometimes they will be more anxious, and oftentimes the way that shows up for an anxious avoidant is like they want closeness and intimacy early on. They really love getting connection, but then it'll come to a certain point where they'll feel smothered, and then all of a sudden they push back, they push away, and they're like, "I need my independence." then they get their independence and then they feel kind of guilty for or lonely and then they want that love again. And so it's just this like on and off, like hot and cold sort of dynamic where they're like, you're, yeah, if you're dating an anxious avoidant, you're just like, make up your damn mind. Like, do you want me? Do you not want me? And they're like, I want you, but only for a little bit. And then I get scared and then I don't want you, but then I miss you and then I want you again, right? So that's that spectrum on the bottom of the pyramid. And then I like to think about it as a pyramid because all three of those attachment styles are essentially trying to work their way up to the top of the pyramid, which would be the secure attachment style, which would be basically the embodiment of understanding how to live an interdependent life, right? Where you're simultaneously have boundaries and honoring your independence and can advocate for your needs and your boundaries. And at the same time, you don't fear depending on somebody else because you actually see how depending on somebody else actually can help your life even more than if you were just independent. Albeit there might be a little risk involved, but it's a risk you're willing to take because you not only have gauged compatibility and have built trust with the other person, so it's not like just blind faith, it's like trust that was legitimately built, but also because you know you trust yourself that even if somebody does break your trust, that like you're going to be okay and you can be there for yourself, right? So that's what a secure attachment style would be like. I hope that was simple enough.
Definitely, definitely. So do you think it's possible to change your attachment style then?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Mm,
definitely. But one thing I would say is like the reason why sometimes I don't like talking about attachment styles or just it's not that I don't like it. I think I always have to say this caveat. It's just that like I think attachment styles are incredibly useful.
mm,
I think it's not useful to try to pigeonhole yourself as something. I even try not to say that I am secure or I am fearful avoidant. I usually like to say I have fearful avoidant tendencies. I have secure tendencies, right? Because to not make an identity out of it, because
mm.
these things can be fluid. They
You're
can also
limited as
change
well,
from
putting a late label on
T
it. Yeah.
totally, totally. And they can change. So you might show up as a anxious, preoccupied in your romantic relationships, but then in your friendships, you actually might be more avoidant, right? And so these things can change. In your relationship to your parents, you might be a certain way, right? But different in another. So
Mm,
that's why it's like there's a lot of nuance to this.
mm,
And to answer your question, like, can these things change? Yes, they oftentimes do change over time. But even especially if you're working on changing them, right, and working on doing that healing work, they definitely will change. But even if they change, and even if you're now enacting more secure tendencies, right, like can we live a life like completely rid of triggers? I don't believe so, right?
mm,
Like there's going to be a moment where you do get triggered, but there's going to be a moment where something happens, you get emotionally dysregulated. And in those moments of dysregulation is where we will the temptation to enact insecure our old insecure attachment style tendencies is going to be greatest, right? So you can be somebody who's generally secure and then have a bad day where you're emotionally dysregulated and your nervous system shuts down and you push away your partner, or the other way around, where your nervous system is going haywire and you're like really being needy to your partner and you're like, whoa, what's going on? Right. So I just want to say that because like I don't think we ever get fully healed, nor do I think we need to. This is why like healing your attachment style is one of the elements that really helps a relationship work, but just as important is the ability to actually like sit through the tension, work through it with your partner and come to resolution. Because if you have two people that are insecure but they have the desire and the persistence to work through it and find resolution, then you're going to have a healthy relationship even if there's like things, there's fights happening or arguments happening. But if you had two secure people who lack the conflict resolution skills, which I guess sort of like embedded in the secure attachment style, it would be that you would have those skills. But let's just say for thought experiment that they didn't, right? Like I would place my bets on the insecure attachment style, right? Because they
mm.
have the skill of conflict resolution, and they're showing up through their practices, through their actions, rather than just by the label that I'm secure, right? So
Mhm. Yeah, you mentioned earlier about boundaries and self-love. That's something that I find quite interesting because sometimes when you're in a dynamic with someone who doesn't react to conflict in the way that you need, there comes a point where you're still kind of believing in that the beauty of the love or what you share, and then they're kind of triggering you, and then you think, but for your own self-love, you should be maybe have the courage to say this is not working and walk away. But I think if you have more anxious tendencies, you just keep on trying to get that love. And that's really bad because that's really bad. Then your self-love just goes down and down and down, and your self-esteem. It's really hard in that situation. I mean, to advocate for your own needs, I think. Mm,
Yeah. Well, so I think this is an important maybe point to bring up what a coping mechanism really is, right? Because a coping mechanism can be so like some of the more obvious forms is like smoking weed, drinking alcohol, like watching porn,
mm.
and not that all of those things in and of themselves are coping mechanisms, right? But oftentimes those things are very easy, low-hanging fruit coping mechanisms that we go to during times of emotional dysregulation, right? So when we don't know how to deal with the emotions, when we don't know how to process our emotions, we can reach for those things. So like if I'm lonely and I don't know how to sit with that, then I might just go to the porn. And that's okay one time, but then what if I'm doing that like twice a day, every day, and and it's now costing me like some focus in my business or my work, right? Like now that has detrimental costs to it, right? It's not that it's bad, it's just that there's some costs and there's healthier ways to cope with emotions than watching porn, right? Or smoking weed or doing these things. So that's sort of like the coping mechanisms when on our that we maybe enact outside of a relationship, let's say. I mean, you can still do that in a relationship, but more specifically, the coping mechanisms that we would enact in a relationship, let's say from an anxious perspective, right? Like if I'm feeling anxious, my nervous system is dysregulated, my emotions are flaring up, I'm feeling lonely, or I'm feeling rejected, I'm feeling disconnected from my partner. Now, what are the coping mechanisms that you will enact, right? Or that anybody would enact? Well, the healthiest way would just be to talk to your partner and say, "Hey, I'm feeling this way. This is what I would like. Are you able to provide that? If not, well then okay, at least I know now I can go work on myself and use my own emotional processing to help myself. Or maybe I reach out to a friend,
But
right, and get that
I've
connection
actually
through
seen
them."
loads of all these carousels on Instagram about that and about, doing your own emotional regulation. But what's the point of being in a relationship if you can't, turn to the person who is supposed to be your support, one of your support systems, not your only support system,
Yeah.
but it's really like frustrating. And then you read the comments on these things. It's like they're so heartbreaking. These people are, with these emotionally unavailable people. It's just really, really heartbreaking. It comes to a point like where how much is too much, and it kind of eats away at you, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you're bringing that up because that's a very nuanced like question to ask about this, right? Because yes, like you're absolutely right. Like in an interdependent relationship, you're there to be able to at times depend on your partner, right? Otherwise, what's the point? You just have
Mm.
two independent people sort of sharing a space, but not really leveraging or utilizing or yeah, taking advantage of why you're in a relationship in the first place, right? So absolutely, I agree with you. I think this is the sort of oftentimes with this work with like the attachment style stuff and relationships, what can be sort of frustrating for me and just as I see is that sometimes it can be a little bit of a paradox and it can be a little bit of like a dog chasing its own tail or a little bit of like which comes first, the chicken or the egg sort of thing. Because yes, I agree with you. Like you should be able to depend on your partner. However, right, if you also can't depend on yourself, then that's an issue as well, right? Because then it creates that sort of anxiety, and then your partner can feel that anxiety and be less likely to want to help because you're asking for from a place of more like desperation or yeah, I was just say less desperation, right? Whereas like if you trusted yourself to be able to regulate yourself a little bit more, right, then you could maybe potentially ask in a way that is like not that actually your partner feels like okay, you're just asking for support, right? But to answer your question just more directly, I would say this, like if you can depend on your partner about 80% of the time, right? Like I would say
Mm.
that's a pretty good relationship, right? If you're consistently asking your partner to help you and they're just not even able to give you like 50% of the time, then at that point you have to decide for yourself, right? Whether that's a relationship, like whether that actually feels enough for you, right? Like is 50% of the time enough? If it's not, then you might need to find another relationship where somebody is able to show up 80, 90% of the time. But the truth is no one's ever going to be able to show up for you 100% of the time. And I think in those moments, that's where I'm talking about like being able to regulate yourself or also, like I said, not just it's not that you have to do it on your own, it's that you have to take responsibility for your needs. So if you need somebody there, well, that's where it's like maybe reaching out to a friend, right? Like you're still getting the help, you're still getting the support, but you're taking responsibility for that support, right? You're planning and extending and having a network of people that you can rely on to get your need for emotional connection rather than just a single person, right?
Mm.
So I think that's the yeah, so basically I agree with you. I think that if at least 80% of the time it's happening, I think that's a pretty fair thing
Mm.
to have,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
I
So,
hope that answered the question. I
yeah,
hope that
definitely. So your clients more single people looking for relationships, or are they in relationships seeking to improve, deepen the connection?
Yeah, so I would say most of them are single looking for the right kind of relationship, right? And then helping them sort of set the foundation to be able to continue having that relationship. But I also have had clients in relationships as well. But I think I have a particular passion more for helping people find the right relationship because sometimes it's like with people that are in relationships, it's like what happens if I feel like they should break up, right? Like like I don't want to help two people that I'm like, man, this is really tricky, right? And so I think I do a better job at helping people be able to find a compatible relationship and a fulfilling one than even trying to help fix a broken one, let's say.
Can you give us three tips that you would give then to someone who's looking for a healthy relationship?
Yeah, well, so the first thing is like you have to like process the breakups that you've already had, right? Like and even if they happened like a long time ago, right? Like there's things, there's lessons there, there's juice to be extracted there. If you can't look yourself in the eye and say like I have truly like forgiven myself and my partners, my ex-partners, right? It doesn't mean you have to want to talk to them ever again, right? Like I'm not saying to bring them back into your life, but if you can't forgive them, if you can't forgive yourself, then there's something there, right? There's something there that hasn't been fully processed or worked through. And likely that is creating this sort of projection onto the people that you're meeting now. And it's creating these internal blocks that is actually preventing you from attracting the right kind of partner. Because if you haven't learned the lesson, right? I'm very much a believer, and especially I know your podcast is a little bit more spiritually inclined, right? Like the
Mm,
universe is going to give you this like the same situation over and over again until you learn the lesson, until you
mm,
prove to yourself and to God, to the universe that like you got the lesson. And so it's like instead of like having to attract another partner and learning the lesson there, if we actually go into the past and we learn the lessons from our past relationships and we can then apply those lessons to our current relationships, well, the universe is like, okay, well, you got the lesson, so I don't need to send you another similar situation for you to finally learn this thing. Now you actually start to attract something different. And maybe that something different isn't the ultimate relationship for you. It might not be the one, the be all, right? Like, but it'll be the next step, right? And that's all we can really ever ask for in life is like we don't know if it's gonna be ever the this is the thing, this is the ultimate. All we get to do is get to the next step, the next level of the video game, right? We finally
mm,
beat that boss, and so you have to like learn and beat the boss from your past relationships by taking those lessons, and then you get to level up, and then you get to play the next level, and that might be the one that's like your ultimate partner, or it might just be another nuance or another flavor or a different wound that you didn't realize was in there. And then you get to work through that in this new relationship, and so it's not never a failure, right? Like as long as you're doing the processing work to really discover like, okay, why did I attract that? That's the real question to ask, is like, why did I attract that? What was my subconscious trying to gain from that, right? And what did I learn? So that's tip one, number one, let's say, it's just like
mm,
processing the past relationships so you stop projecting those things onto your current relationships or future relationships. Another thing I would say is like be very, very clear as to like what it is you're even trying to attract, right? Like now this can be a little easier maybe for like avoidant types, but for anxious types, I often find that they don't really have a clear idea of what they exactly want. And it's more so like they're sort of molding it or melding it to like what their partner wants, right? Or they're just sort of like in this open space about like, oh, I could not. And then it really depends on what my partner wants to do. And I think it's really important to just like think about what is the lifestyle that you want, right? What are your values? What's really important for the values of your partner to have? Like, and then don't sacrifice those things, right? Because so much of what we do is like we have an idea, we have this vision, and then we meet somebody and we connect with them, and then we're like, oh yeah, this feels good, like chemistry and like, oh, endorphins. And then all of a sudden it's like, is that value that important, right? It's not that important actually, right? And and so then we overlook these things, we overlook the red flags, or we start to like just
Mm.
downplay the importance of the things, of the green flags that we said we were looking for, right? Because we're prioritizing that connection and the chemistry, right? So that's the second thing, is like have a clear idea and then don't deviate from that, right? Like to a certain extent, right? Like this is also important to know yourself. If you're more of an avoidant, I would actually give you slightly different advice. I would say kind of like understand that your ideal woman or your ideal man doesn't actually exist. You have way too many standards likely, and you actually need to kind of lower your standard. Not lower them, but just be more realistic,
Yeah,
because there's
humanize
this
them.
sort of, yeah, humanize them, right? But if you're an anxious, I would say you need to actually have more standards and increase it, right? So you can see how, like, depending
Yeah,
on
yeah.
what side of the pendulum you are, it will be depend on the answer. And then the final thing I would say for avoidant and anxious is like slow the fuck down. Like slow down. Do not have sex on the first date. Don't have sex in the first week, in the first 2 weeks. Don't have sex until you really feel like your heart is safe and that you know to a certain level of like confidence that this person is like matching that vision that you created for yourself, right? And that the values are there, unless you're like consciously doing it in a way where you're like, okay, I know this partner is not in congruence and this is just a sexual experience, then okay, go for it, right? But at least be conscious about that, and also be conscious about the consequences, because I think a lot of people think that's what they want. They're like, okay, this is cool, it's just going to be sex. But then like you get attached and and it's just like you get that connection. So it's just like, if you know that about yourself, then why would you do that to yourself, right? Why would you put yourself in that situation unless you're never going to see that partner again? Which, if that's where you're at and you just want to explore your sexuality, then I recommend you travel, because that's the only way that I found to sustainably sleep with people, like, and then not have to deal with any of the emotional baggage or consequences afterwards, because you're just gone. Boom. Either they leave or you're leaving, and it's just like this constant ebb and flow. So to summarize, I would say like go start with the past, right? Like, and heal that stuff, learn the lessons that you need to from those past relationships, identify the red flags that you were ignoring in your past relationships, right? So that'll help you inform the future vision that you have, right? So from the past to the future now of what you're trying to attract and what is it that you really do want, what are the values that you want your partner to have, and even simple things as like, do you want them to have a dog or a cat? Like practice, think about the practical things as well, right? Like it's like, is it practical to meet somebody that lives on the other side of the country or the other side of the world? Like, why would you, if you know that from the get-go, why would you try to like develop a relationship with that person, even if they met all of your values like matched up, but then there's some practical incompatibilities. That's an important aspect too. So, anyways, you get the vision, and then finally, when you're actually in it, right, slow down, give yourself like some space, give your heart some space, and don't have sex until like you're sure that like, okay, okay, like I'm willing to risk it for the biscuit here, but I've done my due diligence about making sure this person is in alignment with me.
Great. I love those tips. So, a couple quick questions I ask everyone. What is the book that changed your life?
I mean, there's so many, but I would say like The Way of the Superior Man was a big one for me.
Mm.
I remember I was in I know I believe you're in Spain, right? So like
Mm.
I did the Camino de Santiago when I
Oh,
was
wow. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I did
yeah,
that too.
nice,
Mm.
beautiful. Yeah, I did that in my early 20s, and I remember I met this woman who was like almost twice my age. I think I was like 22 and she was like 38 or something like that. And we were like kind of had this little fling on the Camino, and like but the thing was that she was this woman and like I was this like boy. And so I remember like I was getting so emotionally reactive, and I was just like, man, like this woman is way too far ahead of me. Like I was struggling to keep up. And so I remember I like was looking stuff up, and I like found like this copy of The Way of Superior Man, and I believe I found like an illegal like copy of it, and I just like downloaded it onto my phone, which I bought the book later. So,
You don't feel guilty.
sorry. Yeah, I don't feel as guilty. But I remember just reading it like on my phone as I was doing the Camino de Santiago, and like applying it in real time to this woman that I was like dating. And I was just seeing it in front of me like, oh my gosh, like it was working, and it was allowing her to feel safe in her body and open up. So it was just this really beautiful foundation for me to get like kind of like the deeper principles of like what masculine containment is and how to provide that for the feminine. And essentially it's just emotional safety. And I have this really kind of clever line that I like to say, which I believe you asked what your favorite quote is. I'll give you
Yeah,
one
that's the
from
next
another
one. Yeah,
person because
yeah, that's the next
this
question.
would be it
Yeah.
would be too arrogant for me to quote myself, but I'll still give you the quote
No, it
that
would
I
not
that I
be. That's what I want. I
created.
want a quote that you live by. What's the quote that you live by?
Well, I think the masculine leads by attuning to the feminine's needs. I think that
Mhm.
really encapsulates
You
it
make
for
it a
me,
rap.
right?
You have to
Yeah,
make that
exactly, right? Yeah, exactly. I had to. You
a
know what I mean?
rap.
The masculine leads by attuning to the feminine's needs. Stop your
Love
coping
it.
mechanisms and smoking that weed. No, just messing. But yeah, so that one. I mean, I also like Aristotle. It's the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without fully believing it. I think that one's a very powerful one that I try to live my life by, and just recognizing that there's two sides to every story. All there is perspectives. There's no like one absolute truth that, it's just perspectives. We all have different perspectives. And I think this is particularly applicable to relationships where you have, sometimes, there's the joke, there's like three perspectives, right, to every argument.
Mm,
It's just like your side, their side, and the truth, right? And so like I think reminding ourselves that like sometimes in relationships, either in a dating or in the relationships, it can feel like, oh my gosh, but Danny, like you don't know what she does or you don't know what he does. Like he's like this though, right? How am I supposed to deal with that? And sometimes you're not supposed to deal with that. I'm not saying you have to try to make every relationship work, right, to the detriment of your health. Like sometimes the answer is to leave. But I think like more often than not, when I've been in those situations, I was overestimating just how much they were the problem and underestimating just how much I was the problem and how many things that I could have been doing better that would have potentially like improved the relationship, or even if that relationship was destined to be doomed, at the very least it would have created a much more easeful and kind way of exiting a relationship, right? Which was something that was never able to do until recently in the last couple of years, is to actually exit relationships with just as much love as we started them, right? And that's only possible with like usually with two secure people who actually communicate all of those things, right? And are able to hold space for each other. So,
amazing.
yeah.
So what are you working on now?
Well, right now, I mean, I run a men's circle in person. I also recently started a virtual men's circle, right? So that's something that I'm growing and wanting to get more guys in there, right? To just offer value and provide some brotherhood. I think that's a big aspect of what is wrong with the world, specifically
Mm,
with like, and when it comes to guys, is that we're just so isolated, especially everyone's working from home now, virtually and stuff. And it sucks that like it's a virtual men's circle, if, I guess one of the constraints, but at the very least, it's a place to connect with other people doing this kind of work, other kinds of guys that care about their emotional well-being, care about growth, care about like wanting to attract and build and maintain a relationship like full of ease and maturity, right? So that's the main thing. And then the other thing, oh, this is the last thing I'll say is exciting. There's actually, so if you've heard of Tiny Desk, there's Tiny Desk concerts. So it's this NPR
yeah, I
here
know
in the
it's
United States.
amazing. You're
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
that?
right. Yeah, so there's a contest that happens every year, and I'm actually working with my band to create a video and submit and then make a video entry submission there to
Oh
potentially to
wow.
try and win the contest. And I think
Attachment
that would be,
styles there. That'll be
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, well, not attachment style. That's just that's just, yeah, with my music and stuff. But I think it would be really cool to be able. So that's kind of irrelevant. That's sort of like my musical. That I have.
Amazing.
But yeah, I'm really excited about that right now. So we'll see. Even if we don't win, it's like, I just want to try. I just want to put my best foot out there. So
Definitely. So
yeah.
where can people find you?
The easiest place would just be the DannySalinas.com, like my website on there. You can read some blogs. You can sign up for my newsletter, join the men's circle if you want. Another, the other way, it would just be simply on Instagram or LinkedIn at the Danny Salinas. So I'm sure you'll have
Mhm.
links in there.
We
I
will.
don't want to spell it out, but I guess the only thing I'll just spell out Danny as Danny, and then Salinas is Salinas, in case you're driving and you don't want, you just want to take a mental note.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you so much, Venus. I really appreciate your questions, your energy. You're just like, you're so present and attuned. And thank you for just, I know it can be all over the place. Sometimes I get super excited, but you did a really great job of just keeping us on track. So thank you very much.
Thanks. The documentary I've watched recently is Kunk on Life, and this is on Netflix. And I wanted to watch this because I really do love Diane Morgan, who stars as Philomena Kunk. And she is a very, how would I say, naive interviewer. It's really cool to watch, actually. And so Kunk on Life is a British mockumentary available on Netflix featuring Diane Morgan as Philomena Kunk. And she is a deadpan presenter. And she tackles the meaning of life, pondering profound topics such as love, happiness, success, and mortality, with her signature blend of absurd questions to experts, real experts, and misguided logic. When I actually watched this for the first time, well, I've only watched it once, it reminded me of when Ali G started out, because no one knew him when he started to interview experts and ask really stupid or basic questions to people who were kind of quite academic and not used to the media limelight. And it really reminds me of that. And it's kind of interesting to see how these experts react to these silly questions and how they, keep their cool and stay formal, etc. And that's kind of very similar to this. So often the experts are left baffled by her nonsensical yet oddly thought-provoking inquiries. And some of these questions that are asked are like, wow, I'm just thinking, who was the scriptwriter here? I think they're kind of quite fascinating. And the show masterfully parodies serious documentary formats, offering sharp social commentary wrapped in dry humor and brilliantly awkward moments. So if you're interested in pondering these questions, even if you're interested in history and art, culture, etc., this is a really nice thing to watch. Because I do think sometimes that Netflix gets a bad rap. People think that having Netflix is a really bad thing to do with your time. And that all depends on what you're watching, of course. I think you can use things like streaming platforms in an intentional way. And I think it's important to have some type of escapism in your life anyway. But of course, I tend to avoid things that have violence in them or some kind of dark messages or messages that might not be empowering. So I do look for things that actually could add value to my work. So things on love, relationships, sexuality, spirituality, all the topics that we cover here, health, of course, as well. But also it's nice to have some escapism that's kind of lighthearted, maybe thought-provoking to some degree, but sometimes something that's going to kind of allow me to unwind. Because I know recently when I've been working quite late, my brain does need some time to unwind before going to bed. And it is nice to have this type of escapism. And I think I was reading recently in Psycho-Cybernetics, which is the book I'm reading now, about how important escapism is. But of course, you have to have a good type of escapism, of course. So yeah, let's not talk badly about Netflix. It really is about using it mindfully. But what I do find on Netflix is there's so much offer, and I don't really know what to watch a lot of the time, because a lot of the time I'm just not interested in things that have maybe dark storylines or fantasy. I like reality. Inspiring reality is something that I like to watch, and also I like to be gripped by good stories as well. So I'm kind of looking for something right now. The next thing I'm going to watch, though, in the cinema is Baby Girl. I can't wait to watch that. That's going to be definitely something I'm going to be reviewing on here. I think it's not just for the, to see the sexual storyline, but also to just see the phenomenon, to understand power dynamics, older women, sexuality, younger guys, all of that is really a lot of food for thought in that. But that will be coming soon in a future episode. But for today, we're looking at Kunk on Life. And if you have Netflix and you want to enjoy a couple of hours of escapism that's kind of educational, then I highly recommend it. Now it's time to slow things down as we prepare for this episode's guided affirmations meditation. It's probably not a good idea to listen to this while driving or operating machinery. Instead, take a break from whatever you're doing, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and enjoy. I am open to giving and receiving love. I appreciate the trust and connection I share with others. I am worthy of love, respect, and healthy connections. I feel secure in expressing my needs and emotions. I appreciate the stability and comfort I feel in healthy, balanced relationships. I am grateful for the people in my life who support and uplift me. I am grateful for the loving and supportive relationships in my life. I am open to giving and receiving love. I appreciate the trust and connection I share with others. I deserve relationships built on trust, honesty, and mutual support. I can be independent while staying connected to those I care about. I nurture connections that align with my values and emotional needs. I embrace growth in my relationships and within myself. I'm grateful for the loving and supportive relationships in my life. I am open to giving and receiving love. I appreciate the trust and connection I share with others. I trust myself to choose relationships that nurture my well-being. I respect my boundaries and I honor the boundaries of others. I am thankful for the lessons past relationships have taught me. I am thankful for partners and friends who respect my boundaries. I am grateful for the loving and supportive relationships in my life. Are you looking to strengthen your pelvic floor in a fun and engaging way? Introducing PeriFit, the pelvic floor trainer that combines biofeedback with interactive video games. With PeriFit, you can track your progress and improve your pelvic health while playing games with your vagina on your smartphone. It's easy, effective, and more importantly, it's fun. For a limited time, you can get 25% off with the code Venus15 at checkout. Visit perifit.co today and take control of your pelvic health with PeriFit. That's perifit.co and use the code Venus15 for 25% off. The link is also in the show notes below. Strengthen, play, and thrive with PeriFit. Disclaimer: consult your healthcare provider before starting any new fitness program. To find out more about me and my orgasmic lifestyle, visit venusohara.org or follow me on Instagram at instagram.com/venusohara. Make sure to search for the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast by Venus O'Hara in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks for listening, have an orgasmic week, and make sure every day is a climax.